Hello, my name is Portia Bridges. In my presentation today, I will be exploring the virtue pride. Can pride be considered a virtuous quality, or is it deserving of the negative connotations that are often preconceived? I believe the answer to both is yes. It is my goal to showcase varying instances in literature that not only support both ideas, but also to focus on the main notion of pride being a virtue that has driven a plethora of literary works throughout history. Anne Bradstreet was regarded as the first woman poet in America. In some of her prominent works, one could identify the allusions used to describe that her work was not of high quality. While many readers would classify Bradstreet as a modest individual lacking pride, I would counter-argue that Bradstreet's humbleness allowed her to possess a subtler pride. The prologue was a prime example of this. Bradstreet mentioned, "My foolish, broken, blemished muse so sings." She contradicted her own humbling claims by referring to the great Greek poets. By calling her work a muse, she subtly included herself with the other 9 Greek muses. Nathaniel Hawthorne was considered to be a dark romantic because of his keen interest in the darker emotions of humankind. His work in The Birthmark was heavily influenced by elements of Gothic fiction. In particular, the human power and uncanny aspects influenced much of the pride-driven motivations of the anti-hero Aylmer. To summarize the nature of the work, Aylmer was a man of science who was consumed by the task of removing his beautiful wife's one flaw, the birthmark. When confronted about the legitimacy of his drug concoctions, he responded, "Do not mistrust me, dearest. Its virtuous potency is yet greater than its harmful one." Aylmer's unsettling obsession with being in control was a direct result of the pride he had for himself, his abilities through science, and through man's ability to obtain perfection. Ultimately, it was these collective layers of pride that led to Georgiana's unfortunate death at the conclusion of the story. Zora Neale Hurston was an anthropologist of culture, and her work became quite prevalent during the Harlem Renaissance. How It Feels to Be Colored Me was a piece of hers that gathered attention because of her unapologetically prideful disposition throughout. For instance, Hurston full-heartedly embraced the uniqueness of her jazz culture. This orchestra grows rambunctious, rears on its hind legs, and attacks the tonal viol in primitive fury, rending it, clawing it until it breaks through the jungle beyond. I am in the jungle and living in the jungle way. My face is painted red and yellow, and my body is painted blue. My pulse is throbbing like a war drum. When the piece ended, she noticed a fellow white listener sitting motionless. It was apparent that he viewed the performance as mere entertainment, while Hurston viewed the performance as an experience, something that was meant to be felt. Despite these differences, her detailed account and reaction proved her determination to not shy away from the culture that made her unique. Claude McKay was also an important Black writer during the 1920s. McKay channeled his pride in his culture to benefit the fight against social and political injustices of the time period. In his poem America, McKay wrote the following: "Although she feeds me bread of bitterness and sinks into my throat her tiger's tooth, stealing my breath of life, I will confess, I love this cultured hell that tests my youth. Her vigor flows like tides into my blood, giving me strength erect against her hate." Through his words, readers not only detected the proudness of the author's journey in America, they could also identify how the author's pride motivated the call to action he engulfed it in his work. While McKay was able to embrace the land of opportunity, he also recognized the need to challenge the nation actively to work against racism, or else, like priceless treasures sinking in the sand, America would never reach its full potential and freedom for all. Today, Jhumpa Lahiri is an accomplished author who often writes to shed light on the immigrant experience. Her work, In the Third and Final Continent, conveyed an interesting approach to the idea of pride through American exceptionalism. When the protagonist first met his landlord, they had an interaction that highlighted a clear cultural disconnect between the two. The conversation went as follows. She commanded, "Say splendid." I was both baffled and somewhat insulted by the request. I said nothing. With the recent landing of the moon, the older woman strongly encouraged the protagonist to join in her celebratory remarks. In doing so, her pride to be an American and her proudness of the country's achievements negatively affected the progression of her relationship with the protagonist. It was Lahiri's goal to exhibit how one's national or cultural pride can influence the advancement of race relations amongst individuals of varying backgrounds. To conclude, pride is a timeless virtue that has been utilized by countless authors and has appeared in literary works across a wide span of time periods. It is an emotion that brings out the most negative and the most virtuous qualities of those who indulge in its influence.